For those of you that opted not to go through the basic features of Microsoft Word, when we looked at the basic text document and you branched linked right to this slide, that's fine. But again, as we start our look at the Hyperbook, we're going to make the assumption that that you know all of the basic features that we discussed in the previous 15 or 20 slides. So now we're going to be looking at the Hyperbook, which basically offers the learner an environment that's richer in word processing. We're going to be using and talking about a lot more graphics, about how to incorporate more things onto the internet, and using the resources of the Hyperbook as more of a standalone interactive resource that can be used with the students. So in other words, before with the basic text, we just created a text. Okay, we created a workbook or a handout. With the Hyperbook, we're going to be creating links and using it as a vehicle for exploring the entire lesson. So this is really at a higher level. It's more sophisticated than the basic text that we looked at. But it still uses only the features of Microsoft Word to make it happen. So with that as, again, a quick introduction, let's go ahead and move on in the presentation. For this portion of the presentation, go back to course outcome number 4 and pull down the Hyperbook. The title of the file is hyperplanets.doc, and again, as you did with the Planet Study Guide, you can use this Word document to follow along. You remember also you can keep your textbook open to pages 343 to 377 because that's pretty much the sequence that I'll be going through these extended features of Microsoft Word. Again, the Hyperbook is a little bit more powerful. It can do some things that are designed to be used with the student independently, independent learning. So we're going to be looking at some of these extended Hyperbook features on the next slide. The basic features of Microsoft Word are shown in the leftmost bulleted column. Those were features we looked at before, as well as the enhanced features that we looked at that were in the second column, the inserting and spell checking and printing. So again, you must know how to do that. At the bottom of the slide, there is a link that if you feel you have not mastered those text document features, you can click where it says click here to proceed to the basic text document, and it will take you back and you can review those commands that are in the first 2 rows. If you move on to this presentation, we're going to be looking at extended Hyperbook features, and we're going to be looking specifically at WordArt, text color, some tables that we actually talked a little bit about in the previous version as well. Show you how to set up columns, and probably the most important feature of the Hyperbook is the insertion of hyperlinks. So if you're ready, let's take a look at WordArt. WordArt is a feature of Microsoft Word that basically combines simple text with the more powerful graphics effect of color, size, and shape. It offers you a more sophisticated and visually appealing feature for preparing your Hyperbook. And so we certainly want to try to use some aspects of WordArt in our Hyperbook itself. It's pretty simple to create WordArt. Go to the top of your menu, click on Insert, and way off to the right is the option for WordArt. When you click on WordArt, it pulls in the menu that offers you something like 24 available styles, different colors, different shapes, different sizes, and so forth. So you can scroll through the menu that you can see hidden behind this text box here. You can see some of the different formats there. You can scroll down, highlight the format that you like the best, and click OK. When you do that, the Edit WordArt text box dialog box will appear, and it shows you where to insert your text, your text here. As you start typing, your text will appear, and it's designed to make it very simple for you to convert simple text into something that's a little more elaborate. In addition, and we've talked about this before, I believe, you can change the color that's in there. So, for example, when you look at the menu, there's some word art in here that's kind of a purple color. If you like the format, but you're not keen about the color, that's not a problem. Select that format, enter your word, your text in there, and then as your word art is inserted into your HyperBook, all you have to do is click on it, and then using the text color feature that you're familiar with, you can see it down at the bottom with the arrow pointing to the A and the red underneath. You can change the color to anything that you'd like. So word art is something that you might want to use in your HyperBook. I used it on the first page of the HyperBook example that I gave you on the Guide to the Planets. So it's a good example for you to use and something you might want to consider. All right, let's move on when you're ready, and we'll take a look at tables. A table is composed of a series of rows and columns of cells that you can fill with either text or graphics. One of the nice features about tables for the HyperBook is it helps you organize and present information that you're going to insert or bring in from a variety of other sources. So, tables are basically an excellent way to align numbers for a column, create individualized page layouts, or as in the case of page 4 of your HyperBook, a way to provide a location for your students to enter data. Page 4, we have a table that is basically 4 columns across and 3 rows going down. We use the first row as to label the columns, and then we've offered the student 2 other rows in which they can enter information. Certainly, as you can see, it's a simple process to do this. You go to the top of your tabs, click on Insert, and the table is is right there for you. Click on Table. When you click on Table, this graphic appears that allows you to click and drag your mouse to select the desired numbers of rows and columns. So again, a cell holds either text or images, and once you release the mouse, you will get a blank table. What I did for our example here is I went up and started entering the labels. So what's the name of your planet? Describe your planet here, and so on. Now, a table can always be appended. You can add columns, you can add rows. It's much easier to add rows than it is columns, but you certainly can do it. You simply take your mouse, hold it over the last column, do a right mouse click, and you'll see a menu that says Insert Columns to the left or to the right. And certainly that will do. You can do that. The problem that you have when you insert columns, though, is that sometimes it kind of goes off the page. If you're adding a column that is wider than the width of your document, you have to start shrinking up each individual column. Otherwise you can't see it. Rows are much easier to add. You can go down to the last row, keep hitting the Tab key until a new row appears. So when you're creating a table, my recommendation is always take a little bit of time, think about what you want your table to contain, and make sure you have the right number of columns. The rows, again, are much easier to add to. So once you've identified your rows and columns and clicked out of the insert box, you'll have the blank table appear. And you have several other options. If you take your mouse, put it anywhere on the table, and do a right mouse click again, you have the options like you see on the screen to go down to something called Table Properties. You'll see it on the drop-down menu. The table properties allow you to align and wrap your text, and you notice that it has some tabs at the top too. So anything that you tell it to do, like let's say you wanted to left justify the text or you wanted to center it, you can do that either for the table. If you only wanted to center a row, you can click on the tab for the row. Same with the column, same with an individual cell. So table properties offer you a number of features, including, as you can see down toward the OK button, borders and shading. So you can change these borders. Right now it's just a simple black line border between each of the cells. One of the things that you can do is remove the borders altogether. So it has the properties of a table, but it looks like it's not a table. It just looks like you have set up nice columns of information. That'll work good if you do not expect or do not want the student to enter any information. If you do, like in the case of the HyperBook we have here, you're going to want to leave those borders there so they can see the limits of what they're doing. All right, why don't you go ahead and pause the presentation right now and go to the HyperBook, the Solar System HyperBook. Go to page 4 and practice a little bit with the table. Enter some data in one of the cells. Maybe add a column or a row down at the bottom of the table. Get familiar with how tables work. And then when you're done, come on back to the presentation and we'll move on to the next slide, which is a look at how to create columns. Columns are a lot like tables. They help you organize information, but the primary difference is the flow of the text. While tables present information horizontally in cells, columns basically align text vertically across the page. So as you can see on page 5 of the HyperBook is an example of how I created a series of text and then used the column feature to put them into 2 columns. Columnar text is good. It helps you. It's not a very critical function, but it does save some space sometimes, and so you might want to look at how to do that. Now this one's a little different. You don't insert columns. Columns is part of the page layout. So you go to the tab at the top of the menu that says Page Layout and go down to and click on Columns. And you'll have the choice of creating 1, 2, 3 columns and setting them up as either left or right. Be sure you highlight the text first and then click on Columns. And decide how many you want to cross. Your data has to be fairly contained within a measured column. Otherwise, it could get into requiring, for example, let's say 2 lines to do 1 item of text, and then things start to get kind of poorly aligned. So use columns to your advantage. Again, you might want to try to stop the presentation now, go into the HyperBook, look at the columns on page 5, maybe try to convert them from 2 columns to 3, and you'll see what I mean about trying to space them correctly across the page. All right, when you get done, come on back, and we'll move from taking a look at columns into the final important feature of the HyperBook, and that's the hyperlink. A hyperlink, you're probably familiar with, connects users to websites. That's its primary purpose. But what you may not know is that a hyperlink can actually connect users to other documents, other Word documents, or to other presentations, a PowerPoint presentation. So in your HyperBook, you can actually create a link that instructs your students to click on the link to view a PowerPoint presentation. Right in the middle of your HyperBook, a PowerPoint presentation will come up, and they can view the PowerPoint presentation, close that, and then come back to the HyperBook perhaps and answer questions, such as what we've done on page 4 of our solar system HyperBook. But let's talk first, though, about how to create a hyperlink that is that points to a web page. If you look on page 4 of the HyperBook, or the example that's kind of in the background here on this slide, you see at the bottom of the page there's 3 lines of text, and obviously they're links. They're links to the first one's called kidcosmos.org, the second to 9 planets, and the third one to a NASA site. To insert a hyperlink, the first thing that you want to do is select or enter the text. So I entered those 3 lines of text, and then select it. So you got to highlight it like we've done here. After you've done that, you can go back up to the Insert tab at the top of the menu, click Insert, go over and click on Hyperlinks. And when you do that, you'll get a dialog box that's entitled Edit Hyperlink. Now, notice this might not be what you expected if you've never done this before. You have kind of 2 areas here, if you will. When you bring up the Edit Hyperlink dialog box, it points directly to a folder on your computer. In this case, it's our resource materials folder, in which I have 9 files: HyperPlants, a rubric 1 and 2, and a space handout. Now, we'll talk about those in a second. The second area of this dialog box says address, and that's where the arrow is pointing to. And at that point, if you wanted to go to a website, you must precede the web address with http:// That indicates to the computer, to the Microsoft Word, that this is a website. Okay? If it does not start with http:// the computer is going to assume that the file you're pointing to, the address that you're pointing to, is in the same folder. Now listen to what I'm saying. Is in the same folder as the HyperBook. So these 4 files, HyperPlanet, the 2 rubrics, and the space handout, would need to be in the same folder as the HyperBook, and they are. See how it's pointing to the HyperPlanets? That's our HyperBook folder name, remember? Okay, so in the address, if you want to link to another document, you simply click on the document. So let's say we wanted to link to the rubric 1.0. You would click on that file. It would populate the address down at the bottom without the HTTP in front of it. And then you'd click on OK. And when the student clicks on www.kidcosmos.org/kidstuff, it's going to open up the rubric. Now, of course, that's not exactly what we wanted to do, but the idea is there. Okay, so if you want them to open up a Word document, you could put click on the following link to view the rubric. Okay, and then where it says view the rubric, you could highlight that, and you could insert this file name. For web addresses that begin with http:// those will literally go out to the internet. So creating hyperlinks in your hyperbook is what makes it a hyperbook. Okay, so the idea is use the hyperbook to integrate with the internet. One of the advantages of using hyperlinks in your hyperbook is that you're sending your students to the exact location that you want them to go. So if you got young children particularly, you may not want them, you may not want to tell them to go out there and search the internet for a medical condition, because who knows what you're going to find. If you want them to go to a great website that you found on measles, then populate a hyperlink with the URL for the measles website that you want them to go to. So this is a great way to control what your students are actually doing. So again, to insert hyperlinks, you identify something on the page. This says enter text, like we showed you down below, but literally anything on your web page or on your page in your document can be a hyperlink. So for example, you see this little piece of clip art there that looks like a light bulb. If I clicked on the light bulb and then insert a hyperlink, I could make the light bulb a hyperlink. So I could tell my students, click on the light bulb to learn more about Thomas Edison. Get the idea? So again, text can be a hyperlink, clip art can be a hyperlink, a photo can be a hyperlink, some word art could be a hyperlink. Anything that's on the page can be a hyperlink. And the more creative you are in the hyperbook with hyperlinks, the more exciting that hyperbook is going to be to your online student. Just one caution. If you make the light bulb a hyperlink, you got to tell them that, okay? Because you're not going to be there giving instructions. You've got to say the light bulb is a link to a Thomas Edison site. Click on it. If you can't assume that they're going to know that these things are hyperlinks. Okay, here's what I want you to do then. I want you to go ahead and pause the presentation. Bring up the Solar System Hyperbook. Perhaps turn to page 4. Try out the 3 links, see if they still work. Perhaps make something else in the Hyperbook a link and link it to, I don't know, any website that you might like. You could link it to www.rmu.edu if you want to link it to our university's homepage. Just experiment with it for 15 minutes or so, and then come on back and we'll recap the Hyperbook. Now that you returned back to the presentation, we're going to wrap up our look at constructing text-based materials, and specifically the Hyperbook, with a short review. To use the full features and capabilities of the Hyperbook, we introduced 5 new extended features. Page number 1 of the Hyperbook looks at word art, the implementation of word art. So you can see how it was being used. Notice also when you construct your Hyperbook that instructions are key. They're absolutely key to helping the students successfully navigate through your Hyperbook. So you need to be consistent also with things like text color, which is next here. For example, if you look at my Hyperbook, if you were to print it out in color, you'd find that anything that's in blue is an instruction to the student. So any text like you see on this screen is a student instruction. So I alert them to that when I introduce the Hyperbook to them. So they know that as they're going through the presentation, as they're going through the Hyperbook at their own pace, they need to be alert for anything that's in blue. So again, use word art and use text color to your full advantage in the Hyperbook. The Hyperbook is designed to be given to the student, to let that student use it on their own. And so there are certain things that ought to be in your Hyperbook. Okay, so here's page 2 of the Hyperbook. Example that I've given you is got some great ideas here. Put the student's name, date of the lesson, and if there's more than one teacher teaching the same topic, it's a good idea to put the teacher's name in there too. Use this introduction to the topic to tell the student what they're expected to do with the Hyperbook, and some of the conventions that you're going to use. Like I said, the blue text and so on. You want to enter some information in there about time. So if the student is going to start the Hyperbook, they want to get an idea about how long it's going to take them to complete it. So that's a good idea. And then finally, go ahead and put the lesson goals in there itself, because you'll find that very, very useful. Let's continue with our look at some of the features. Next slide. In this presentation, we showed you how to use both tables and columns, and use them obviously to your full advantage. I really like the use of tables more than columns, especially if it offers the student an opportunity to complete part of the Hyperbook. So the Hyperbook can be a workbook. It can be an assessment tool, and tables and columns will be a big help in that area. Again, what I do with a lot of my students, and I don't need to do it with you because you're actually going to upload your Hyperbook into one of your course outcomes. But in a hybrid course or even in a traditional course, I would give the student a Hyperbook, maybe on a CD. I used to give it to them on floppy disk drives, but I don't know if anybody even has those anymore. You give it to them on a jump drive, or you can have them download it. You have them do a lesson, whether they're looking at a PowerPoint presentation or visiting websites like you see here. Complete the workbook and send it back to you as an email attachment. It's a great tool for online teaching. The last feature that we looked at was hyperlinks, and I showed you how to create a hyperlink or to link to other documents. So here's an example in the Hyperbook that I gave you on how you can create a page called Additional Activities for the lesson and identify internet sites. And in this case, I also threw in some videos that were available in the school library. Those aren't links. Those are just text. But you can see the blue links above. Those are all websites that I had visited as an instructor. I knew they were good sites that pertained to the academic content I wanted them to learn, as well as appropriate sites for, in this particular case, for young children. So again, hyperlinking can be done either to a URL, and notice that that HTTP : / precedes several of these links, okay, and probably should be in, if you looked at the actual hyperlink inside it by editing the hyperlink, then you would see HTTP at the front of every one of those. Okay, now linking to a document again would be something that you could do, and I would like to see that in everybody's Hyperbook that you create for EDUC 6610. All right, I want to show you one more feature that I included in the example Hyperbook that I gave you that was an idea that an elementary teacher gave me that I think is really a great idea, regardless of what level of instruction. So let's go on to the next slide. At the end of the Solar System Hyperbook that I gave you are a series of what are termed planet cards. And this was really a great idea. As part of the Hyperbook, the instructor set up a portion of the Hyperbook so that the students could actually print out, I think it's the last 3 or 4 pages of the book. Okay, so they can print them out. She set it up so that the printer, when the students were ready to do it, her printer actually had a little heavier cardstock, so that when they printed the last 4 pages, and by the way, they all got different ones. They all didn't get the same set of Planet cards. She very quickly added some and deleted others. She gave some of the students duplicates. Okay, so I think, for example, there's at least 2 Mars cards in this, and then the students printed them out. She gave them the little safety scissors so they didn't hurt each other. They cut them out, and then they were able to work with each other, sharing and trading cards, so that eventually they would all get the full suite of 9 cards. So I thought it was a really fascinating idea to do that, and it's the kind of thing that you could build into a hyperbook. Think about how you might want to do that at a higher education level. Okay, there might be some important dates for you to remember in a history class, or some important elements of a public speaking speech that you're going to give. You can create this kind of material that can be shared with your students, and the hyperbook is a perfect place to do it. All right, so that's basically the construction of text-based materials. Let's wrap up this presentation, go on to the final slide. At this portion of the course, you've completed course objective number 4. So we're about halfway through the course already. But now it becomes the time for you to do quite a bit of activities offline. We've gone through this presentation on constructing text-based materials. The next presentation in Outcome 5 will look at creating visual-based resources. And we'll be doing that work, of course, with PowerPoint. But for now, before you start course outcome number 5, I want you to begin to prepare some text documents for your online course. At least one for each course session. Now again, in 6610, I use course outcomes. You might use course objectives, you might use weeks, doesn't matter. But I'd like you to prepare one basic document for each of those sessions. And you should have probably at least 8 sessions. Maybe if you have 15, then you don't need to do something for every single one of them. But let's say at least 8 of them, okay? And I want you to prepare at least one hyperbook at a minimum anywhere in your course. So pick one of the outcomes, one of the sessions, and do a full-blown hyperbook with that. The next thing you're going to do for us then is you're going to view the presentation on how to populate your Blackboard course with these materials. In addition, we'll take that opportunity to show you how to create a chat room and how to create a discussion board. So look for the outcome number 4 presentation on populating your Blackboard course with text-based resources. That concludes this program. And I hope it was enough information for you to create some really excellent text-based materials. I think you'll be successful at doing that.